Hi, Claire. It's very
Hi.
good to have this conversation, this opportunity to have this conversation with you on this topic, this concept, complicated concept of loyalty. We are both very much into philosophy and critical thinking, and we enjoy digging into ideas, concepts, things that people struggling with on different levels. And that is what we will try to do today. And maybe first you would like to introduce yourself with few words.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. My name is Claire Foster, and I come from Connecticut in the United States. And I have a background in philosophy. I graduated with a master's, during which time I studied not only philosophy, but ethics and religion as well. And during that time, I also became quite interested in philosophy for children. And since that time, have been studying and writing and learning as much as I can, in addition to practicing, communities of philosophical inquiry. And I'm happy to be here and talking about topics in critical thinking with you today.
Excellent. So my name is Dotan Russo, and I'm from Canada. I was a criminal prosecutor in Israel. I have a PhD in law, and I teach now. I'm a faculty here, and I teach courses in philosophy and law, including critical thinking. So again, this is something that I have a very strong connection to. And you mentioned philosophy for children, and some people may wonder how these two things combine, because it seems like philosophy is a very abstract, very complicated thing to do or to process. How come children in what way children can actually interact in a philosophical way?
Yeah, they absolutely can. The P4C program is one that can be applied to really any pre-collegiate learner. It's a pedagogy that was developed in the 70s and is now well established around the world, probably the least amount so in the United States, unfortunately, but we're working to correct that. But no, absolutely, there's a multitude of research that not only suggests but proves that kids are not only capable of philosophical reasoning and critical thinking on their own, but they enjoy it. And if you've come across any children, no matter where you are in the world, you'll know that kids are natural born philosophers. And so the program is a wonderful one and really encourages these lifelong skills that we hope to instill in the next generation.
Very interesting. And as we mentioned at the beginning, loyalty can be understood at different levels, but also there's a philosophical dimension to it. So, how do you understand loyalty? What is loyalty?
Oh wow, we really jumped right in, huh?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's such a simple concept, but when you really think about it, it's a struggle to think about what we're loyal to and why, and in what ways we're not loyal and why. And I came back to a couple of patterns, which I'd love to get your perspective on. So I thought about loyalty in terms of one-way loyalty, and I thought about loyalty in terms of two-way loyalty. And I would love to know, just maybe from your own experiences, if you can think of examples that suit that. So, for example, with two-way loyalty, you can think about family or friends, where you know there's a sense that others feel a sense of loyalty to you. One-way loyalty can be perhaps more transactional, like you would be loyal to a store or a particular brand or uh, something where you might not be feeling that the recipient is loyal back to you, yet you still feel a sense of your own loyalty. And so, sort of a starting point. What do you think about that? Do you think about loyalty in that way, and sort of the natural progression of the emotions we feel out of loyalty from the one or two way road that you could create?
Well, I think there are a few points that you're making in this question. One of them is what is the origin of loyalty? What drives loyalty, right? Is it about interest? Is it about something that we do because we are expecting a certain reward?
Mhm.
And if so, then how should this be applied in situations where the reward is not obvious? And of course, this also forces us in a way to get an idea or to try to figure out for ourselves where does loyalty coming from? And of course, there can be all sorts of answers to this. I personally believe that there's a biological evolutionary dimension or origin to it. Because when we think about us as humans, our ancestors, loyalty it was a matter of survival. If you were not part of a group, you would not survive, and therefore it is a survival instinct which is rooted inside us. It is wired inside us. regardless of specific context and so on. That is why I think many people, experience this from a very early age, and whether they implement this in the way they act or not, they feel the need to be loyal. And if they don't, sometimes they may decide not to be loyal, and yet they will feel guilt and other things about this. And what may be unique about loyalty is that it is about a certain very strong, or possibly a very strong commitment to something, regardless or potentially regardless of the context, just because of the kind of connection that you have with this thing, maybe a person, a partner, children, family, community, culture, religion, state, whatever that would be. You have this strong commitment to align with this thing, regardless, potentially regardless of the context. Because if it depends on the context, it's easy. Everything in our life is in context, right? You do things, you would support certain things because it makes sense to you, and so on. Loyalty is unique in the sense that it stands on its own feet as a factor by itself, regardless of the context, at least potentially. Now, this is also what makes loyalty so complicated, because the context can vary, and there can be a context where this tendency, emotional, rational tendency to align with something, to support something, to be committed to something, may contradict certain moral aspects, and so on. And also, obviously, because it's about commitment, very often it would also contradict self-interest, because you need to sacrifice something very often, right? If you're loyal to your spouse, this means that you need to sacrifice maybe certain potential interactions. If you're loyal to your children, obviously there's so much sacrifice in this. But even if you're loyal, or moreover, if you're loyal to your people, to your nation, this sometimes may come with a very heavy price. And me, as an Israeli, a former Israeli who lives in Canada now, experienced this very strongly, especially in the last 2 years. So I think you're touching very sensitive nerves of what loyalty is all about. Why is it such a complicated thing, and why it is challenges so much?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point about our evolution in terms of sort of how we're wired. And you suggest correctly that there's something within us that might feel a sense of loyalty towards a cause or a movement or another individual, and with the opportunity costs that lie with it. But sometimes we're also loyal simply because we are social creatures, again, from an evolutionary standpoint, and because we live in a certain community, because we are around others, a family, friends, or religious groups, whatever they may be, that we feel loyalty not because of something that's necessarily in us as individuals, but as social creatures as well.
Definitely, I definitely agree. And also because it's not just an evolutionary thing, or we're driven by evolutionary existential needs, this is also very relevant today, because when you're being loyal to someone, there's also an expectation, at least in some contexts, that you will be rewarded. First of all, on a philosophical level, it makes you part of something bigger than you. And we all have this need to be part of something meaningful. Beyond ourselves. In a way, this helps us with existential loneliness that we're actually living in. Secondly, once you're committed to the group, the other parts in the group who share the same loyalty are also committed to the group, and this includes you as well. So there's some protection and reward from that perspective. And lastly, because, and as a personal opinion of mine, because it is so much wired in the way we think and the way we act, also on emotional level, if we turn our back to this loyal commitment, then there's a personal price we pay. Just like when you're doing something immoral, right? Maybe nobody would know about it. Maybe you prioritize a certain interest that you may have, but you have a sense of guilt, you have a sense of accountability. And I think that this is something that people experience as well if they are not fulfilling, of course, each one with his own relevant loyalties, if they don't follow this. So this need, or this tendency to be committed to other things, by definition, also rewards us. Now, of course, this depends on the context. Sometimes the balance would be negative, sometimes it would be positive. When it's positive, usually it's an easy case, because you're implementing this need of yours and you're being rewarded. But when you're implementing, or you're required to implement this commitment in circumstances where there's a price to pay, sometimes heavy price to pay, then things becoming much more challenging. And this is actually where you find yourself in this dilemma of how to act. What is the right way to do? What is the right thing to do?
Yeah. That's sort of getting back to the one-way loyalty versus the two-way. Is there sort of, would you say there's an expectation when you are loyal to something that that cause or that individual would be loyal back? Or do you, as an individual, can you live with a sense of one-way loyalty?
Well, I think there are a few dimensions of loyalty, and two main categories are emotional and rational. Emotional, I think, which is a powerful drive in this sense of loyalty, often with align with conscious, subconscious expectation for a reward. Even in the most intimate relationship, think about parents and children, right? Parents are loyal to their children by nature. And yet, especially when they grow up, but even from an early stage, there is an expectation that a child would act in a certain way, which would show kind of thankfulness, appreciation, loyal emotion, kind of loyalty, and so on. And if you do not experience this, this may hurt you very much. And for sure, this is true about relationship, friendships, and so on. I think on the rational level, it might be a little bit different because when you're loyal because of rational things, you're less potentially less involved and involved emotionally, and therefore maybe there's less expectation. But let me ask you this in this context, since when we try actually to bring those abstract ideas to reality, right? If you were to educate your children about loyalty. If your 10 years old child would ask you, would describe your certain dilemma, loyalty in his class, should he turn his friend who was cheating in the test or not, right? How should he balance loyalty? How would you define it for him? What would be the guideline?
Um, well, I think that it's loyalty comes from a sense of it's really coming from within. So I don't know that one needs to live with loyalty, and that's something we can certainly discuss. I think being loyal is a choice. I think that as a child, particularly, you will come across people, you'll come across causes, things that you believe in, to which you may feel a natural sense of loyalty that even if you're not in communication, if you don't directly intersect, you will continue to feel as though this person is someone I want to be near, to follow, to listen to, or this movement is one that I believe in, even if I am not engaging with it on a regular basis. Kids can understand this concept as well as adults. So in some sense, I would say loyalty very much lies from within. And I think it's very much, though we talked about it, sort of relating to what is naturally embedded in us from an evolutionary standpoint. I do think it is something that we hold on to based on a somewhat subjective set of criteria. So I think that, uh, for example, to use an example that a kid would understand, um, and this happened in my real life, and it's a silly example, but it will show you what I mean. We used to go to the same sushi place, a local fish market, every week for years. And every week we would get the same order. I'd call, get the same order. I'd pick it up. It was the same amount every week, same order for years. And finally, one day when I picked it up, I said to the guy who worked there, "What is there? What about a free roll someday? What about a loyalty card of some sort? Have you guys ever considered that?" And I never ordered there again. So if you had asked me in those 2 years, what sushi was the best sushi in our area, I would have said this market because I felt loyal. But as soon as I sort of self-reflected on the one-way nature of that relationship, that there was no loyalty back to me, that there it was purely transactional, my loyalty snapped like a twig, and I didn't go back there. And it's a small example, but it something about knowing that no one was looking after me, that there was really no sense that I was being cared for in the years that I'd established my own sense of loyalty towards this business. It was more tenuous than I thought, and it broke. And so I wonder if there is a relationship between whether it's an individual or a business or a cause, feeling that sense back in order to strengthen one's emotions when there's a ripple, when there's an issue, and also for the duration as well.
But is it a virtue? Would you inspire your children, for example, to be loyal?
I don't think that I would say that. I don't know that I agree that loyalty is a virtue. It's certainly not a vice, but is it a virtue to be loyal at all costs in all contexts? I would say no. I think that as individuals, as critical thinkers, whether you're a child or an adult, I think we need to know our own minds. And I think that individuals and causes and businesses alike change, as do we. And I think that we need to be constantly in a mode of evaluation uh, where we need to keep in mind our own self-preservation. We need to sort of constantly be weighing that balance of whether whether the object of our loyalty is still doing good, even if it's not necessarily loyal back to you, but is it still doing the thing that you are, is it still creating the reason why you're loyal to it? Whether that's doing something good in the world or for others or for yourself or whatever it is. But I think this really speaks to the intersection of critical thinking. I think that to refer to loyalty as just a virtue, a standalone virtue to which we must or we ought to aspire, sort of robs our own the necessity for us to think ourselves. What do you think? What would you say?
I think what you're pointing out is that absolute loyalty is a vice. And we can think of many examples to this. Yet the question may remain if loyalty is still something valuable in itself, in the sense that just because you are part of or you identify yourself as part of a certain group or a certain context, this by itself serve as a factor, sometimes even a major factor, not absolute one, but a factor to take a certain position. As opposed to if we assume that loyalty is not a virtue, is not something to inspire, then maybe one would argue that the fact that you are part of something, the fact that you are part of a certain group, doesn't by itself has any value. You should observe the context, the reality, completely neutral. And I think this is what makes it difficult because there are on the spectrum, there are situations where it is clear that one should not be loyal, right? We take the most radical example during the Second World War, the Nazi officers, right? Such as Adolf Eichmann, who was tried in Israel, and he said, I was only following orders, and this is my duty as a soldier, right? Why are you holding me accountable? This argument obviously was not accepted, and for good reasons, because there are limitations to loyalty. But there are a lot of situations where there's a gray area, and also it's becoming even more complicated because very often what we are loyal to is actually our origin, our context, right? For example, if we talk about community or culture or a country, a nation. So the loyalty to the nation or to the culture, to religion, is not just about loyalty to something outside of us, external, but also to something internal, because our identity is very much based on this. And
Mhm.
it's very hard to separate, for us to separate between this external thing to who we are. And this dimension of loyalty, which actually also may be translated to loyalty to yourself. In some way, it is also loyalty to yourself. Not always, but sometimes makes it even more complicated because to what degree a person should again be inspired by your children, our children, when we educate them, to take this into consideration, the fact that
Mhm.
they are involved either personally or partially personally, but definitely by being associated to a certain group. And in this context, we can bring the example of October 7 and the war in Israel the last 2 years. Everybody knows that Israel has been criticized very strongly in the last 2 years for what people may argue. I personally completely disagree, but that there is a genocide, starvation, and so on. And I think people, Jewish people, Israelis for sure, find themselves struggling with this because there are situations where we would criticize Israel for certain things. Obviously, in any war, there are bad things that happens, maybe even crimes, and so on. And of course, we are critical towards this. Yet, when we find ourselves in the context, which is outside of Israel, where Israel is so much being put to the corner in terms of criticism, sometimes misinformation, and so on, and being colored in such a black color, what stance should we take? Should we express our criticism? Should we be neutral and just bring our own critical thinking and apply it in the specific context? Or should we say, there's another dimension, there's another factor which stands on its feet, and that is my loyalty to my country, to my people. And this should also be put into equation and impact the way I act, the position that I take, the way I communicate this, and so on.
That's interesting. When you're in a particularly a special spot because your nationality, you don't live in the country with the nationality that you identify with. So I can understand, and I think you mentioned this before, how there might be an interest within you to balance out the voices that you hear, that the voices that are out there. You hear sort of an extreme version. In Canada, you might not hear a similar balance of voices if you were in Israel, or other places. Of course, that balance is
Or
different depending where you
even if
go.
I do, even if I did hear it in Israel, which I might, I would not feel the same,
That's
because in
interesting.
Israel, the factor of loyalty to my people become irrelevant because I'm among my people.
Yes.
So the point here is that loyalty serves as again as a factor, a substantial factor by itself, regardless of the context, right? Of course, the context is also a major factor, but the loyalty impact the way I address it in a very strong way.
So now how would you describe your emotional response in this particular context? Would you say that, how would you describe how your emotions play into different loyalties? Is there a pattern that you can identify where certain types of loyalties elicit certain responses over others?
I think so, in this context of Israel, but it could be applied to other contexts as well. I can identify to myself what is the internal mechanism where emotions are very strongly involved, where it's more rational, where it's more balanced. In the context of Israel and October 7 and the war and so on, it is definitely the emotional aspect is very dominant. And I can observe and I can feel it because when I'm exposed, for example, to criticism and sometimes very harsh criticism towards Israel, I feel from within inside the need to protect. I need to voice, the counter argument or to expose the misinformation or whatever that would be. It's not just a rational thing. I'm deeply involved, as if it was, a family member of mine who was insulted. So definitely, this dimension exists. But I think that there's the rational dimension is also very strong. It's obviously not a conversation about politics and so on, so we're not going to get into those details. We're discussing this in the context of loyalty. So I think it's a combination of both things. And another aspect that I would like to get your thoughts on, loyalty is not just about how loyal we are. It's also the way we judge others because we observe, we have certain expectations from the surrounding. Sometimes we expect loyalty, and sometimes this loyalty does not exercise. And we tend sometimes to judge this. Is it justified? To what degree? Um, should we accept that this loyalty tendency is something that one may have, in a stronger way, and one may have in a weaker way, and one may implement in that way or the other way, and we should not be judgmental just towards the fact that someone doesn't show loyalty to what we would expect them to be loyal to.
Yeah, I mean that's so hard, right? Especially with loyalties which elicit an emotional response from us, whether they're related to our nationality or religion or our family. I think that's one of the hardest things to identify someone who you feel as though, in whatever profiling you're doing, should have a similar sense of loyalty to you, and why wouldn't that person feel that way? I think that only heightens perhaps your own sense of loyalty towards that cause, because again, perhaps you're trying to balance out a voice, a detracting voice, or a voice that should be louder but isn't. So I would say that's incredibly frustrating when that happens, but of course it's inevitable because we all have different senses of loyalties towards whatever it is that we're analyzing or that we feel loyalty towards. So I think that's inevitable, but frustrating.
Is it acceptable, you think, from moral perspective and from other maybe perspectives, that one just prioritize his own interest, his own benefit, over loyalty to over this commitment to others? Why? Why should one sacrifice his own interests? At least, especially when there are serious things on stake, right? Why?
I mean, that is so hard to say because I can think of many examples related to some of the things that you've referred to just in this short conversation that have been incredibly frustrating for me as well. Yeah, it is a sacrifice, not just of time and of thinking space, but potentially of relationships, friendships that perhaps didn't break, but might have bent a little bit as a result of competing loyalties. There are huge sacrifices to be made. And in terms of the morality of it, I don't know if I could go there. It sounds like maybe you could, but I'm not sure if I could comment on someone's general moral compass if they didn't express a sense of loyalty that I felt that they should, based on whatever it is that's holding them back, whether it's similar opportunity costs or fears for safety, or everyone has sort of their own bag of tricks that they're coming to the table with. Um, I would like to say that there is a sense of morality involved in some instances of loyalty, but um, I think that's quite subjective. Do you? Do you think there should be some
Well,
attack in certain circumstances?
I guess my questions refers to where at the hierarchy loyalty stands, because there are lots of different virtues, lots of different. Where does it stand, right, on this hierarchy? Is it on the top? Is it close to the top? Which means that other considerations sometimes should be sacrificed for it or not. And and I think that that's the key question also in real life situations where you feel a friend of yours is trying to get a job where you work and he's asking for your recommendation, yet you don't think he's a good fit, right? So you have a contradicting values, right? Being honest, being truthful. You also have commitment to the company that you're working for, and so on. But you also have this friendship. And friendship, one of the factors of or the characteristics of friendship is loyalty. So how should you balance it? And to answer this question, you need to identify for yourself among all the different virtues, let's say, right? Again, being honest, being truthful, and so on. Where does loyalty stand? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it somewhere down below? And here again, I can tell you that in the example of Israel, um, I when I look around me, I see maybe I'm wrong, but this is my interpretation. I feel that there are many people who are choosing or prioritizing their own interest over their sense of loyalty, because it can be very uh, pricey to stand in the side of Israel these days, let's say in many places, both in terms of academics, in terms of your workplace, in terms of your friendships and so on. It comes with a heavy price. So you are forced to actually to decide, to prioritize in practice, whether you think about it philosophically or not, where does loyalty stand in the hierarchy?
Yeah,
And
I
I
mean, I
think
think.
that, yes, sorry,
Oh,
yes,
sorry, no,
please.
go ahead. I'm just letting you make them. Go ahead.
I think from what I observe, I think that many people, maybe most people, based on the way they act in this context, they put their loyalty on a relatively low level in the hierarchy of of priorities.
I think that what I would like to see in at least a theoretical world is less of a reliance on loyalty, which you might not feel back, as I've said a few times, and more on your mind, on the thinking piece. So to use that example, if you have a connection to Israel, if there's some initial sense of loyalty towards Israel, I want you, not you actually, but the general you, to feel connected to the cause, and not because of blind loyalty, which I would argue is faith, but because you have thought through the issues that you know that have been made public, and you have read a million sources, and you have talked to a variety of people from various walks, from various backgrounds who've seen different things. And I want to see that you have made up your own mind through thinking versus a sense of just pure loyalty. Because then what's the line otherwise? What is the line? What happens if something um, that you really don't agree with happens? When then does your switch flip to feeling not loyal? It feels too tenuous that way. And so I feel like I have a stronger sense of loyalty when I have thought through the connection, I have thought through the reasons why. And even if it's a one-way relationship there, that I can go home and go to sleep and believe that what I am supporting and what I feel loyal to is right. And
But then the question is it based on, does loyalty serve any um, does loyalty has any impact on this? Because if by just by rational, if you analyze it rationally and you would follow what your rational outcome tells you, there's no need for loyalty.
no,
Obviously, you will support what is good and what, yeah.
I think it's the connective tissue. I think it's the connective tissue because it's very much there. I do. It's not as though I don't ever feel a sense of loyalty. I do, and I don't think it's a meaningless um act or condition or characteristic. I'm not even sure how to characterize what loyalty is. Um, I think we could classify it as, or I would classify it perhaps as connective tissue between not data points seems so dry. Um, but I think that it's not what I solely would hang my hat on. I think that it would be a combination of my thinking and my feeling that I would stick with whatever it is.
Mhm,
And that I would remain open to it being evolving. Um, that I would be open to receiving inputs and changing my mind if I received an input that really made me feel differently. But I do think that loyalty would give that original position, whatever it was, the benefit of the doubt before, before I would change my position on something.
mhm. Would you say this also to the most intimate connection, for example, between parents and children? Um, should parents stand beside and be loyal to their children no matter what?
I mean, that's, uh, the example, I've not experienced this in my own life, but um, I think of individuals that I know that have had to make really difficult decisions with children who have encountered substance abuse or really extreme problems that have impacted entire families. And so I do wonder if there are, I mean, I think there are examples where you might have to choose loyalty to the rest of your family or choose loyalty to yourself over a child if there was an extreme circumstance where, um, there was just so much, there was danger, there was wrongdoing, there was other, negative elements that were coming into one's life or impacting other children. I can see that scenario where you would have to choose between loyalties, but I mean, that would be an impossible choice. And I pray that's not terribly common, but I don't think that's terribly common. And I do think it feels different when it's with family. I do.
So what I take from what you're saying is that even in this most radical example of this intimate, close connection between parents and children, there's still a limit to loyalty, and the loyalty of the parents to their children should also be examined by the circumstances. And if there are some very radical circumstances, then we should, or it's acceptable to give up loyalty even from parents to their children. And I think this is, obviously we're talking about very extreme, but I can reflect on this as a former criminal prosecutor. I noticed many times situations where people committing horrible things, and there's a question: how does the immediate family and the parents react to this? And most often, what I found out, like probably, I don't know, more than 90%, the parents will be supportive of the children, not supportive of their actions, but they will be supportive, even in the most, radical situations of pedophilia, murder, and, horrible things, abuse, the parents will be there for them. And very often I ask myself, God forbid, how would I react in this situation? And my bottom line is that I would act the same. When I reflect on this, I think this tells me something about my wire regarding loyalty. I think that my wire regarding loyalty is extremely dominant as a personality, um, and um, and in and I feel it. I feel it in different contexts, and I feel it. We spoke about Israel. I spoke about now this very radical example, and so on. So we have a certain tendency, and yet we are not free from observing and trying to figure out for ourselves to what degree it is a right approach, right, and so on. So as we get closer to the end of the conversation, just one last question. So you obviously your main area is philosophy of children and so on, and children is where this stage of life is where we're actually wiring. We're wiring the mind and the people and the conscious and the moral compass and so on. So this may become a very relevant question, right? What kind of education, inspiration, concept do you think would be the right one to deliver to the focus on with children in the context of loyalty? It's
I
a hard
think,
one, I know.
yeah.
Yeah, but
I think that with loyalty, I would encourage any students of mine and certainly my own children to almost as an inverse follow their emotions. I think part of raising kids successfully, well, my kids are fairly young, so the jury's out with my own family so far, but um, is to encourage them and help them become their own independent selves and not shadows of or replicas of their parents or any other group that you're a part of, and to own how it feels to be them. How do they feel about the world? They have their own contexts that are in development, as we all do as adults. And I think in that sense, to become aware and to that, and therefore to remain aware of how it feels to live in the world, what kinds of people you gravitate towards, what kinds of things that you believe in. I think those things evolve over time. And I think to encourage children to really dial in to what makes them feel like the best version of themselves. What makes them feel like themselves is such a gift. And so, what they might be loyal to at age 5 would be very different to what they feel loyalty towards at age 13 and 21, and so on and so forth. But I think, after this conversation, it feels as though loyalty is very much a reflection of our individual wiring. And although we're social creatures, I think it's such a gift to be able to tap into our own individual senses of self. And that would be something that I would love to give as an educational gift to both students and my own kids as well.
Very insightful. And again, I would like to thank you for this conversation. It was great, and I hope there will be a follow-up to this conversation in the future as well. But yeah, definitely, I very much enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.
I did as well. Thank you so much.